You are listening to a Difference for One podcast, episode number 35. I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Charisse.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English Sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one.
And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one. Hey guys, this is Nicole here, and today I'm with my cousin Eric, and we are going to talk about a pretty sensitive topic, but we are going to be very careful in how we go about it. We are going to be talking about how to overcome suicidal thoughts. So Eric and I have both struggled with this in the past, and if I'm not wrong, I think neither of us is currently struggling with it, but we do both struggle with depression from time to time. And I heard Eric's story from a video that he shared, so I knew that he wouldn't be too shy to come on here and talk about this with me. And I felt a strong feeling recently that I needed to do this episode with him.
We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors.
So how about to get started, Eric, can you share with us whatever you're comfortable sharing from your story?
Yeah, I can do that. So if I remember, it started during high school, and I had a good group of friends going into high school. And as time went on, they all start liking each other, then breaking up with each other, then the group breaks up, and then you, who hasn't been around all of that, now has no friends. So
That's
that's
sad.
kind of where it yeah, that's kind of where it started. That was in 2004, and I kind of came out of it around 2016. So it was
It's such a long time to be struggling with that.
Yes, it was very. I remember weekends. You know, in high school, the weekends is kind of what you live for. That's where you go out with your friends. You don't have to worry about school. You don't have to worry about anything else. You just go have a good time. And I remember some Friday nights, my parents would be out doing something, and I would be the only one at home sitting in the dark, depressed that I wasn't out doing anything with friends or, you know, having fun, having the time of my life, you know, building up what should have been a good high school experience. And I remember those times were some of my darkest. They weren't my darkest, but they were some of my darkest moments. And some of those times I do remember my mom coming home and being surprised that I was still there, and she could see my face and how sad it looked and how depressed I looked. And because I saw the look on her face, that made me even more sad, even more depressed than I already was. Because, you know, she was concerned. She didn't want to see me like that. And because of that, I was like, oh, dang it, this is real. I am in depression. This is real. I should be out doing stuff, and I'm not. But somehow I made it through high school. And at the very end of high school, I had good friends. Don't get me wrong. I did still have very good friends through all of this. Just happened where, you know, they weren't around a lot. So I don't blame them at all for anything. When I graduated from high school, I met a group of friends. I kind of met them before. I had known them for a while, but we started hanging out and doing stuff together right at the very end of when we graduated. And that was like the shining moment in that long stretch of depression, that I actually had this good group of friends that was always there, and that they would text me, they would call me, they would be concerned for me, they would want to do stuff with me without me putting any effort into being with friends. Because that's kind of how it was, is I'd always try to put in the effort to do stuff with people, and it was always just a no, or I have something else, or yes, and then they bailed on me, and it just kind of made it hard. So I was like, oh, great. Like, this is a breath of fresh air, and it was good for about a year, and then I went on my mission. And being on a mission, it's great. It was a good experience. And there are times when you get depressed, but for the first half of my mission, I was still in that. I went back into depression. I don't know. I can't explain kind of why, because you have someone with you for 24 hours a day. And so you have someone to talk to. But I guess just kind of missing my family and not being around them for 2 years was kind of the reason why my depression was present for, I guess, a year of those 2 years. And then one moment in there was the book I was telling you about earlier, is the How to Be Totally Miserable by John Bytheway, which in that book, it just talks about what happens to miserable people, what they do or what they think kind of creates these miserable moments or these depressed moments. For example, one of them is worry about things you can't control. If you're someone that just hates rain, but then it starts raining, well, you're not going to be too happy because you don't like that too much, but you can't control the rain, can't control the weather. So why are you going to worry about rain? And reading this book, which I highly recommend to people, How to Be Totally Miserable by John Bytheway, that was a game changer. It helped me start thinking a little differently than I was before. It didn't get me completely out of my depression, but it helped. And that was the turning point in my mission for the second half. That second year, I was able to kind of cope with everything. I had a lot more success on my mission because of the different mindset I was in. I would say I was a lot more enjoyable to be around just because I was more lively, I was more talkative. I had a smile on my face more, I guess. So kind of moving on from there, you come home from your mission, I was doing good. I came home, now totally different life than what I was living for 2 years. And you can imagine kind of what that does to someone's mind, someone's, emotional state. Is I went back into depression because I didn't know how to cope with life. I wasn't prepared to come home to, I thought I was coming home to what I was before I left on my mission, but it was completely different. I did need to kind of learn how to live with my family again, because you kind of forget kind of how that is. You move from person to person throughout your mission, trying to live with that person, and then you just adjust. So went back into depression after my mission, trying to find that group of friends again. That's where I thought my depression was coming from, is trying to find a group of friends, because I got my energy from being with people. And if I wasn't around people, I would get a little more depressed. I would wonder why, did people like me, those types of things. And the group of friends that I had before my mission, they were there. But like I said, you come back from a mission, everything's different, people are different, and we still did stuff, but time goes on. We need to live our lives, and they went to school somewhere else, or they did all these different things. And so over time after, we just kind of going our separate ways. Now we're really good friends to this day, and we still talk, and those relationships have kind of sparked back up again. But, going through that, I always had to find new friends, and it was quite difficult. So that's kind of the story for the next 6 years. So after graduation, I started dating a guy, and it got to the point where I was being lied to, I was being manipulated, and I was being cheated on at the time. And he had moved to another state, and that's where it kind of was getting rocky. We broke up on a kind of a good note, but for some reason, as soon as he moved, it was all different, where, I was all alone. I didn't know what to do with my life. I was trying to figure things out. And I had drove my car up the canyon just to get away. I love the mountains. And so that's kind of a peaceful place for me to go, to think, to let things just kind of escape and come back to reality and be okay again. Well, I drove up the canyon. I was a little tired. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just park. I'll just sleep in my car and just kind of let the sounds of the mountains and the forest kind of creep in and calm me down. So I did that. And on the way home, I get a text from this guy saying, I don't ever want to talk to you again. And, going from where we were on good terms to automatically out of the blue, I don't want to ever talk to you again, that hit hard. And that's when I pushed the pedal to the metal and tried to take my car off the cliff. I don't know how far of a drop it would have been, but it would have been serious. But at that moment, that's when I thought of my 5 anchors that I came up with. And the first anchor that I came up with was my mother. And when I thought of her, it was like a flash of just every possible outcome that could have happened if I succeeded with this suicide attempt. what would my mom think? How would this make her feel? Would she go into depression? Would she start having suicidal thoughts because of this? How about my sisters? I have a sensitive side for my mom, my sisters, for women, because that's where I got my sensitive hearts. I learned that from them. But I couldn't live with myself, I guess you could say, if I were to do that. And that made me slam on the brakes. I stopped very close to the edge. I took the keys out of the ignition so that I would take longer to get back to that idea of driving off the cliff. I'd have to put the keys in the ignition, start it all over. And then I got out of the car, walked away from my car, and just sobbed in the mountains. It was getting dark, and I just cried my eyes out and got back down to calm, like, okay, I love my family. I love me. I need to fix this. I need to figure out what is going on. So I drove straight home to my mom, gave her a big hug, and then my dad gave me a blessing because of me having some suicidal thoughts. And so that was the start of me moving from my depression to not being depressed. I did go see a therapist, and that was a little interesting because I think I had seen therapists before, but I did not think that they helped at all. They didn't help before, and so I was like, okay, well, whatever. This time I was like, what do I have to lose? I want to fix this. I want to get over it. And so I was like, okay, I'll go see another therapist. And I told them what I thought about therapists, that I didn't think that it would work for me. I know they work for other people, but at the time, that's what I thought. So then we get into the meetings. We start talking about things. Let me jump ahead to right before I was driving up the canyon to go calm down. I was feeling a little anxiety and depression. And so I did stop at this therapist's office, but I went to them just to see someone, just to talk to them. I wasn't feeling suicidal. So I went there to talk to someone, and they told me, they said, if this is an emergency, you need to go to the emergency room. If you are feeling suicidal, if you have suicidal thoughts, you need to go to the emergency room. And when they told me that, I started to tear up. I wasn't crying, but I started to tear up. And I tried to say, I just need to talk to someone. My family didn't know that I was really going through all of this, and I couldn't handle telling them everything of what was going on, because then that would make me more anxious, and it was just hard. So I just needed to talk to someone I didn't know. They had no preconceived notions about me, and I could just get it out and I would be fine. But because they told me that they couldn't see me and then I had to go to the emergency room, that's what triggered the suicidal thoughts. So I was driving up the canyon because even those therapists told me, no, we can't talk to you. And that was so hard. And so I drove up the canyon. I actually almost got in an accident up the canyon because as I was driving up there, I think I started having a panic attack. Could have been something else, but I'm pretty sure it was that. I blacked out. My hands and feet started getting numb and tingly feeling, and blacked out while I was driving. I don't know how far I was driving, but I came to, I could see again. I knew I was driving, but I could see again, and I was fine. There were cars around me, and I was being looked over. I was. So that's 2 points.
You mean by God?
Yeah, I was definitely being looked over by God. So now jumping ahead I went back to that therapist place because I didn't know who else to go to. I was like, well, I don't know what therapists there are, so I'll just go to this place again. And I told him that. I told them, I said, I started having suicidal thoughts because you guys told me you couldn't see me. And I said, go fix that.
They probably felt terrible.
Yes, if someone needs to talk for 5 minutes, talk to them for 5 minutes. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Again, this is not me blaming them for my thoughts, but we talked a little bit, kind of talked about, why I was having depression, and I ended up telling him everything, that I was dating a guy that, most people didn't know that about me. Told him that I wanted to be with people and I didn't have that support group from friends. I was too scared to go to my family because I didn't know how they were going to react. So we talked about everything. And it started me on the path of thinking, well, why am I depressed? It started getting me to think of all these different things to fix it myself, because I knew ultimately it was going to come down to me to fix my depression. And a few months go by, I started doing better after that. And it came down to me telling myself, you enjoy being in depression. You actually enjoy it. And it didn't never occur to me. I never thought, oh, well, I really like being depressed, and so I'm going to be depressed so that people will pay attention to me more. It was just kind of this fulfillment of actually letting myself get depressed. And as soon as I figured that out, I was able to cope with everything and fix my depression. So then I thought, okay, well, do I like being depressed? Do I actually like it? Because if I do, I need to go find some more help and get over that hurdle. And I decided, no, I hate being depressed, because I want people to be around me. I want people to see that I am a happy person, that I am who I am, that depression doesn't define who I am. Depression isn't who I am. So I was like, okay, well, I need to be happy. I need to find ways to be happy, baby steps. And then that's kind of when I started talking to my mom a little bit more about my depression, coming out a little bit more to her about that. And we just kind of talked about, okay, well, what are some of the things that you like? And we talked about, maybe some video games, some TV shows, some movies that I liked watching, sporting events, being with my family. And so we started doing all these little things, and me actually doing the things that I like doing. And then after I started doing all those things that I like doing, I started thinking of things that I would like to do but have never done, because I didn't have friends to do things with, or, anything else. And once I figured out that, things just kind of started falling in place. But the most important thing that I want people to know is that depression is different for everybody. It is not a one-size-fits-all cure-all thing, but that we need to think within ourselves what is going to help us. Yeah, other people can help guide us a little bit, kind of like this book, How to Be Totally Miserable, right? It helped me a little bit, and I still think about it. I still apply it to my life. But it's going to be so much easier, and it's going to be so helpful for all of us that are going through depression to figure out what is causing our depression. It could be a loss of a loved one. It could be, I don't look like celebrities. I'm not athletic like someone, comparing ourselves to other people, or a bunch of different things. But we all need to identify the underlying cause of depression within ourselves and then work to fix that. So, for example, my, underlying cause or underlying thing was I had to be accepted by people. I had to be accepted in groups. I had to be accepted the way I looked. I had to be accepted the way I acted, all those different things. And that was causing my depression, and I hated that. As soon as I figured all that out of, no, I don't have to be a certain way. I don't have to look a certain way. I have to love myself. I have to be myself and move forward. That's what helps me.
So I'll go ahead and share my story. So I have talked in a previous episode about how I get anxious. I have anxiety sometimes, and I have not been diagnosed, but I think that I could have OCD. And the main thing that I obsess over when I experience OCD is worrying about things that I say or do that could hurt other people. Mostly hurt them emotionally, hurt their feelings. And I've probably had two main phases of my life where I could pinpoint those phases and say I was depressed. One of them was while I was pregnant with my daughter Kate, who's now 3, and I didn't know that anybody could be depressed during pregnancy. Nobody talks about that. Women are now starting to talk about postpartum depression, which is after the baby's born. But I had never heard of anyone talk about depression while you're pregnant. And I don't know if experts would say it's a thing, but I experienced it, and it's a thing. And I remember having a disagreement with someone that I'm close to. And afterwards, I was feeling so terrible that I had hurt this person emotionally. And I was thinking that I didn't deserve to live if I could hurt someone like that. And I was feeling like, why do I have to be the way that I am? I would venture to guess that most people feel like that at some point in their lives. Why do I have to be this way? Why do I have to keep making these same mistakes that I always make? The second time that I would say I was depressed was this summer. And part of it was a little bit harder because people kind of brushed it off. Like they were like, oh yeah, we're all depressed right now. This year is horrible. And I'm like, no, this year's actually pretty good for me. Not that different from normal life. I'm just depressed. And it didn't have very much to do with coronavirus, if anything. I was having a really hard time with what I think is OCD and having a hard time with thinking that I was hurting people who I love the most. And I would often think in my head what I thought they were thinking about me. I thought that I knew what they were thinking, and it wasn't until my husband introduced me to the concept of thinking errors that I realized I don't know what people are thinking, and I need to stop thinking that I do because it just makes me feel depressed. And it was, again, a time that I hurt someone or I felt like I did. And whenever that happens, I start hyperventilating, but I start to think of all the terrible things that are going to happen to that person because of things that I said or did. And I would feel so terrible, like, why do I deserve to live if I treat people like this or if I make people feel this way? For me, I had my anchor, because you talked about anchors. My main anchor was my children because I knew that they need me and depend on me and that they really love me. But just like you said you started to realize what might happen if you decided to act on your thoughts. And I never had an attempt like you did. I never had thoughts like a plan or anything like that. It was more like, wish I didn't have to exist anymore. It wasn't even I wish I could die, because I thought if I die, then I'm just going to be a spirit feeling dumb, like, why did I do that? And part of me thought, I wish I had never been born, because then I wouldn't have hurt all the people that I've hurt in my life. And that's a really sad, that's a really sad thing to think. But it was like what you said, having a realization that if I ever did die or cease to exist, then my children might grow up with a terrible life compared to what I could give them. They would grow up thinking, why wasn't I important enough for her to want to live? Why didn't she love me enough to want to stay? And so it was thinking about that, and I, instead of wallowing and focusing on the things that I do wrong, I had to focus on the things that I was doing right. And for me, that centered on my kids. I know a lot of people feel like they can never get things right with parenting, and I probably do things wrong. I know I do things wrong every day, but it's just, for me personally, it's the one thing that I feel like I am very happy being a mom, and I enjoy it a lot. And so when I focus on the happy times that I have as a mom, then that helps me realize I do have a purpose here on earth, and I do have people counting on me more than anyone else. I do have people who love me. And so that was what helped pull me through it, is knowing that I couldn't do that to them. Just like you said about your mom and your sisters, you couldn't do that to them. So I wanted to revisit what you talked about, your 5 anchors, Eric. You said you had to come up with 5 anchors, I'm guessing, to hold you in place and keep you from doing anything irrational. So you said the first one was your mom. I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about that idea, and then tell us, if it's not too personal, what your other 4 anchors are.
Yeah, I can't remember if the therapist told me this or if I read it in a book. It might have been 1 or 2 anchors. I might be a little overly cautious, so I came up with 5, and my mom was one of them. So number 1 of the 5 anchors, I thought, has to be something that meant so much to me that as soon as I thought of it, it would stop all irrational emotions, all irrational thinking. And that happened to be my mother, because me and my mom have a very strong bond. And I knew without any doubt that having her as my number 1 anchor, just the thought of her, would help me get out of those situations. Now, the next 4 are what I would call fallbacks. If number 1 isn't working in the moment, because there's many different things that will work in certain situations and other things that won't work in others. And so I had come up with 4 different anchors, and I can't remember the 4 that I had. I think they were kind of along the same guidelines as number 1, something that would be emotionally connected that would stop you from having thoughts of depression or suicide. I think the fifth one, if I can remember, was something that was a lot less, something that I enjoyed. I really enjoyed sports. So number 5 was something like that, a little smaller. I really like sports. I don't want to miss sports. And if I commit suicide, I'm not going to have sports. And I want sports. And so,
It's funny.
yeah, that was one of them. I'm sorry, I can't remember the other 3 that I had because my number 1 anchor was just so important in that moment. That's what stuck this whole time. That my other 4 had just kind of melted away over the years of me remembering them. But just remember that, kind of follow that guideline of number 1 you want is your most important thought or emotionally connected that's going to get you out of those situations. And then number 2 is the next best thing. Number 3, again, the next best thing to number 2, and so on. Because then you're going to have the 5 most powerful anchors to help you through those times. If you do 1 or 2, they could work. But again, if I was in a different situation, thinking of my mom might have not worked. If I didn't have any suicidal thoughts, then thinking of my mom while I was having depression, I don't know, maybe would have worked, maybe not. But let's say number 2 was my sports, and that got me out of my depression. That's why I think it's important to have 5. If people want to come up with 6, 7, 10, and they can remember 10, great. All for it. Do it. Or if they come up with something better, then that's great. But if you have something that you can think about in those situations, then it will help. I think it will help. I'm a big proponent on that.
So, as we were talking earlier, we were talking about how the thought cycle can help you get through depressive thoughts. And while I don't want to discount taking medication or going to therapy if that's what's needed, because that can be very helpful, I just wanted to ask you, Eric, how did changing your thoughts help everything else get better for you?
I'm actually really glad that you brought up taking medication for depression, things like that, because I actually did take medication for my depression. It was a little different than most people do because I also have ADD. When I was with my therapist, we kind of talked about sometimes when you have ADD, your mind can go to these different places, thoughts. And you have a hard time bringing your thoughts together, and that's kind of helps create depression if your thoughts are going here and here and here and you can't sort them all out. And so I was actually on Adderall. It's not a medication for depression. It is a medication for ADD. I talked to my doctor. I always suggest go talk to your doctor if you think that's the route you should take. But that also helped me get my thoughts together. It wasn't a big thing. I won't say it's a big thing that helps me, but it did help. The thoughts, like you said, were the biggest thing that kind of helped me when I recreated my thought processes and how I was thinking. And what happened was, as soon as I thought, okay, I don't like depression anymore, I got to fix this. Then I started thinking, okay, what's one thing that I could do that I could think better on? Well, I think it's safe to say that in most depression, because there's a lot of different types of depression, in most types of depression, one of the commonalities between each is negative thoughts. It happens. It's just the nature of depression. You have these negative thoughts. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try to be positive. I'm going to look at things different ways. If someone looked at me differently on the street, or if someone said, no, I don't want to hang out, or no, I can't hang out, before I would think, oh, well, they don't like me. They're just avoiding me. So then I changed my thought. Okay, just give them the benefit of the doubt and think, okay, well, they're busy. They have other things to do. And it was hard. It was hard thinking, like retraining my brain to think positively in those different situations. But that's what helps me. And so I just started thinking positively of, all these different things. If my favorite sports team lost. Okay, this is going to sound really funny, but before all of this, when I was early in my depression stages, I would think that my sports team lost because I was doing bad things.
Aw, that's funny.
It's just, and people do it. People do that. Oh, I am not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. That must be why things aren't going right in my life, or that's why my sports team is going wrong or losing or, whatever. And coming into these positive thoughts, that's one of the things that I thought, that no, what I do in my life, good or bad, it does not reflect how my sports team does, win or lose. And so it's just this thought process, very intricate thought process of going through step by step. My mom, I keep coming back to my mom, but she was a big help in all this. She may have not realized it at the time, but she was. She would always say, if you are moving forward, it doesn't matter the size of the step that you're moving forward, you're still moving forward. You could move forward a millimeter, you're still making progress. That is awesome. That's what we always want, is we want to make progress. And it doesn't matter if it's this tiny little step, because eventually they'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you will have those times where those big steps come small again. But as long as you are keeping that consistent, taking these steps forward, you're doing great. I always thought of that every single day. I'm moving forward. Okay, great. I thought of something positive. I'm going to do it again tomorrow, and I'm going to do it more. And it would just build on all of that, is just move forward. Leave past behind you. Don't think about the negative thing. It's hard. It is hard. But try not to think about the negative things, and think about positive things, and things about are positive and are good. I'm alive. That is a good thing. I had food today. That is a good thing. I love the sun. It's sunny. That's a good thing. It just, even the tiniest little things that you want to say that is a good thing for you, do it, because it will just get easier and easier to think of good things later on.
I love that. So I don't know about you, but another thing that really helped me, of course, was Jesus Christ. Knowing that he has suffered for everything that I suffer, that he's experienced all my pain and sorrows and knows personally everything that I go through, was so helpful. There were times that I felt like he was distant, and I don't know that I had ever felt that in my life before, and so that compounded my pain. But when I was being honest with myself, even if I didn't feel him as close to me as I normally did, I knew he was there, and I knew that he cared about me. I wanted to share a couple of quotes that I really loved from this past general conference. I have 3 quotes that I really loved. One was from Scott D. Whiting. He said, "Mentally, it became important for us to focus on just the next step. We would say, I may not soon make it to the top, but I can do this next step right now. Over time, the daunting task ultimately became achievable step by step." End quote. What you said, Eric, reminded me of his quote, that we may feel so far away from where we want to be or from our final destination, but all we have to focus on is, what is one thing I can do today that's positive, that's going to move me in the right direction, like you were saying. Another quote that I really loved is from Matthew S. Holland. Let me preface it by saying this. In here, he says repentance. Because of what we're talking about right now, we're not talking about repentance. I want to say that repentance really just means turning to God. And so think of it that way when I say the word repentance. He said, "We must never forget that the very purpose of repentance is to take certain misery and transform it into pure bliss." End quote. So turning to God is going to take certain misery and transform it into pure bliss. I loved that. He also said, "Thanks to his," meaning God's, "immediate goodness, the instant we come unto Christ, demonstrating faith in him and a true change of heart, the crushing weight of our sins, or our turning away from God or feeling distance from God, starts to shift from our backs to his." Or you could even say the crushing weight of our afflictions, our trials, our suicidal thoughts, our depression. The crushing weight of our depression starts to shift from our backs to his. This is possible only because he who is without sin suffered the infinite and unspeakable agony of every single sin in the universe of his creations. For all of his creations, of suffering so severe, blood oozed from out of his every pore. End quote. And then the last quote that I wanted to share was from President Russell M. Nelson. Here he's talking about temptation, and I thought of it as the temptation to end my life, or to wish that I had never been born, or wish that I didn't exist, or wish that I could just die somehow. He said, "When you are faced with temptation, even if the temptation comes when you are exhausted or feeling alone or misunderstood, Imagine the courage you can muster as you choose to let God prevail in your life and as you plead with Him to strengthen you. When your greatest desire is to let God prevail, to be part of Israel, so many decisions become easier. So many issues become non-issues. End quote. And that's how it was for me. Once I put my focus back on God and the purposes that He has for me in this life, for me, it was my motherhood. Once I focused on that and focused on the fact that He loves me, even if at times I feel like no one else does. Once I was able to keep my mind on that, then I was able to replace those negative feelings that I had. And right now, I haven't been feeling like that as much anymore, even though my circumstances haven't changed very much.
I like that. I like what you were saying, those quotes. Moving forward, I always say it is okay to be depressed. It is. What matters is what you're going to do with it. Are you going to let your depression fester, or are you going to conquer your depression? That doesn't mean that you get out of depression, because sometimes depression is an ongoing thing. Conquering depression is you moving forward and moving through the depression with people that you care about, or sometimes by yourself. Majority of the time, I did it by myself. Now, because my family knows what's gone on, I do have them to fall back on and lean on them.
But when you're in the thick of it, you don't feel like you can turn to anybody. At least that was my experience.
Exactly. I didn't feel like I could do that either. I mean, that's why I went to the therapist and said, I was like, well, I have no one else to go to, so I just want to talk to somebody. I always thought, oh, well, I'm depressed. Nobody wants to be around a depressed person. They're just sad and it's just dark and people don't want to be around me. And that added to my depression, right? So I thought, how do I know that they don't want to be around me? Coming to find out, they wanted to be there. They wanted to help me. They wanted to do everything that they possibly could. They just didn't know how. They didn't understand how. But as soon as I went to people and told them, hey, I am depressed. I am going through this. I do need help. Is there anything that you can offer, even just to listen? They always said yes. I shouldn't say 100% of the time, 99% of the time. There's always that one person that says, sorry, I want to help, but I don't know how to help. And that's okay. That's not them saying no. They want to help. They genuinely feel for you. They just don't know how to help. And I think that's also a scary thing for people, is being open about depression and asking for help, because no one wants to ask for help. Everybody wants to be independent, but with depression, there's no independence. You have to be open and let people help you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just want to end by saying that it has been my feeling, by things that people have said to me lately and just things that I've been going through. I think that Satan is working so hard to try to get as many people as possible to feel alone. And I think that he sees an advantage here with a pandemic going on, that everybody in the world is isolated and is having to separate themselves from people they love and having to be cooped up at home most of the time for most people. And I think that he sees it as an opportunity to try to get people to think that they are alone and that they don't have anybody to turn to and that nobody cares about them and things like that. That's why we have to fight that even harder than ever before. We have to reach out to other people. We have to give ourselves time to interact with others, whether it be because we think that they could be the one depressed or to keep ourselves from being depressed. And I don't think anybody is immune to this feeling because of everything crazy that's going on in the world right now. I just want our listeners to know that you are not alone in this feeling and you are not crazy. We are on this earth as mortal beings, and we don't know all that God knows. We do not have perfected bodies yet, but we will someday. And right now is a time to just do our best. And sometimes we don't feel like we're doing our best, but just like Eric said, as long as you are taking millimeters forward, it just matters what direction you're going. It doesn't matter how fast. It doesn't matter how big your strides are. It's good to take big strides if you can, but it's not going to be the end of the world if you can't. For me, it was serving others and looking to others and seeing what they needed. That's what helped me. And chances are, if you, listener, are going through this, there are probably people within your circle who are also going through it and aren't telling you. So we really have to rely on the Holy Ghost to help us know who to help. I think that a lot of people are feeling this loneliness right now. But although you feel this way, I know that God is there for you and that He loves you so much. He loves you exactly where you are now and for who you are now. Thank you, Eric, for joining me for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate all that you contributed.
Yeah, no problem. I do want to say one last thing, because I don't ever want people to feel the same way that I did. I want the listeners to know, if you cannot find anybody to talk to, reach out to me, to Nicole. We're here. I'm not going to judge you. I want to help. If you are feeling alone and you have nowhere to turn to, I'm here to talk, and I'll help the best I can.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Take care.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.